I know, right?
Yeah, no, it was really good.
Hi, I am Dr. Nihal Mayur. I am representative with United Nations Association Zimbabwe. I'm based here in New York. So it's a General Assembly time. Everyone is excited about the global leaders coming here and speaking here at the General Assembly and giving their view and perception. There are so many choices to discuss on. There are so many events going on around the city. There are protests around, there are delegations and etc. etc. But the challenge for me is, what is my country facing? What are the challenges? We are going through a drought. We have cyclone, and our country economy is under crisis. So I request global leaders to come together and work on partnership building, because every country is important, every economy is important. We all can raise together as one world, and that is how we can protect our nature. Our nature is the only world, or planet is only planet. And I will end my saying with the quote of Ban Ki-moon, that we do not have plan B because we do not have planet B. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, at my university, you could still get in until 4:14, and then the door would close. And I'm normally used to getting in at 4:14. So my colleagues know that. But we will start anyway now because we are right in New York. Great to have you. Thank you so much. I was hoping that more people would come if wine would be offered. So maybe they will show up at 6. So. We had kind of 80 registered, so who knows? Some people will join us.
There's some friends are still on the way. Oh, there they are.
Yeah. I said the magic word wine.
Feel free.
Have a seat.
Good way to make a late entrance.
So my name is Maurice Bloem. I work for Churchville Service, and I'm really delighted to have a wide range of guests here from different parts of the world, but also working in different sectors. The session that we hope to have today is a follow-up of a session that my organization organized during the high-level political forum a couple of months ago. That was at 7:30 in the morning, and again 80 people signed up, but not many showed up. We had excellent session though. Where we had also, mission people as well as UN and young and old, and we thought that it really had potential the way we did it, and also the things that we discussed are important. We are looking at a world that is experiencing many different types of crises, and I really think that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we developed together might not be ideal, but it is the best framework we have. If we really are putting some real effort into this, we can overcome a lot of those crises. Yes, they are what you call wicked problems. So you might never, solve them all, but I think you can make enormous progress forward. One of the reasons that we might not make the progress as we should is according to a group of people that started in Sweden and then expanded, is because after we developed the Sustainable Development Goals, we never paid proper attention to the abilities and skills and qualities that you need as an individual and as a community. So this group of people, they did a survey, and more than 1,000 people did the survey, and ultimately they came up with that you need inner development goals in conjunction with the Sustainable Development Goals. So goal number 1 is being, number 2 is thinking, then relating, collaborating, and action. So that resonates a lot with me. So because I am a fan of a philosopher called Ken Wilber, who says that at least every issue or problem has 4 perspectives. The first perspective is I, then we, and it, and its. And if you think about Sustainable Development Goals, you're basically as as a world, you're trying to change a system, right? But you can't do that without also paying attention to who am I and what do I do and what is the role of my community. So what I'm going to ask this excellent panel to do is basically look at, discuss or share with us what they're trying to do around the sustainable development goals, but with that lens of the inner development goals on. And we're going to use a kind of gestalt process within that. That's also very important. I can explain later, what I exactly have in mind. So this is also for them nerve-wracking because there was nothing to prepare. They don't know what I'm going to ask. I think that's also what the issue is about. SDG 1 is something else in context A and B. So yes, there is certain science, there are certain genetic things that will work everywhere, but there are also things that you need to keep in mind, the context and perspectives. So I would like to ask my panel here, or my panel, our panel to introduce themselves, say quickly about your name, the organization you work for, and also I would like you to share what is the pain point that you have, in terms of you or your organization trying to contribute to an SDG, and share that with us. So 2 minutes for the introduction as well as your pain point. Sydney, you would like to start or not? Yeah. Okay.
My name is Sydney Upchurch. I'm a co-founder of a startup. We have built a platform that automates the work of urban planners and transportation planners, and it's designed to encourage more sustainable daily travel. So we're focused on commuting specifically. I came to this field sort of in an unconventional route. I used to work in the NGO world. I did a lot of work in the Middle East and North Africa in economic development and on broader infrastructure issues, specifically in Cairo, Egypt. My startup, we focus, like I said, on the sort of systemic day-to-day travel. And I guess one of the most compelling pain points, I mean there are lots of pain points, but one of the most obvious pain points for me that I grapple with on a daily basis when I think about how our company, which I think is very purpose-driven, how we sort of fit into the broader initiatives to address climate change, is that we're very much focused on individual personal behaviors. And as far as transportation goes and the contributions to GHG emissions, individual choices only go so far to making a dent in reducing emissions. So while we can encourage everyone in the world to walk to work or to take a scooter, we're not really getting anywhere towards moving the needle on sort of corporate actions in transportation, for example, or industrial processes that also contribute significantly to climate change.
Thank you.
John. Yes, my name is John Coonrod. I work for the Hunger Project. I founded and coordinate something called the Movement for Community-Led Development, which has 1,500 community-based organizations from about 30 countries, and they work together to try to shift the power to local people. And I've been actually working on this shift the power issue for more than 50 years. It's because, Maurice, the problem you described as wicked isn't really wicked. It's not, for a small-scale farmer working to take care of her family, it's pretty straightforward. She needs access to health care, she needs access to education, she needs to be able to take a loan and repay it. So it's a wicked problem from the top-down patriarchal mindset. But when you really unleash community leadership, these problems naturally can get solved, even issues of climate change mitigation and adaptation. So I agree completely with Sydney that it's not, it doesn't come down just to individual decisions. But what I've seen is that when an individual, like we did an event and I was on a call with a whole bunch of humanitarian groups, and they were saying what we need is a Greta Thunberg. I thought, wait a minute, there are 1 million Greta Thunbergs in the majority world, in the global south. And we just need platforms for them to speak, opportunities for them to have their voice heard and to take charge. And then, we had a whole bunch of them, and they on calls, and they were just brilliant. But we need to shift. What we need to be able to do is shift our own mindset, because shifting the power is what has to happen, and we need to. It's an uphill battle in a patriarchal world.
Great. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you for that. Mine actually relates very much to what you just said. So my name is Pooja Tolbawala. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I was born in India but grew up in the suburbs of Philly. And I'm testing the waters right now from New York City. So I work heavily in the youth climate space with the Climate Initiative as their youth engagement manager. And then I run Youth Climate Collaborative, which has some storytelling components with a podcast to be released before COP, and then an initiative to get youth on existing boards and advisory councils instead of always creating a separate, youth advisory council or separate youth board. And for me, I guess the pain point, and I also work at Rivet, which is trying to create the world's largest micro-grant fund for youth-led action by harnessing youth purchasing power. And then UNGA, which a lot of friends here are from UNGA, which is the UNFCCC's Children and Youth Constituency, open to anyone to join. And for the pain point that I wanted to talk about is, you said shifting the power. I would say like sharing the power, right? So we all have power, but are we giving that platform that we have to somebody else as well or not? So the way I see my position on a daily basis, I don't face much struggle at all. Like, I'm very privileged in that way. And I feel like I have to use my lifetime to share those privileges in any way that I can. And I say sharing power because let's say you do have you're on a board of directors, right? Do you use that position to then also speak with people who are not there to get their voices there? Do you also say, let's look at the makeup of this board, who's missing, who needs to be here? We're talking about them when they're not even here, so definitely that sharing the power.
It's wonderful to be here with all these wonderful co-panelists and to be joined by you all during the stressful UNGA week. I'm Mary Kate Costello. I'm the Director of Policy and Relations for Church World Service, and I've been with them for about a year now, and prior had the privilege of working with John Coonrod at the Hunger Project, so the issues of the SDGs are near and dear to my heart, and especially the youth aspect in the work. My work with Church World Service has primarily focused a bit more on congressional advocacy and lobbying than my previous work, which focused a little bit more at the UN. So one of the pain points for me dealing with the SDGs and trying to close these gaps and affect systemic change is the fact that most people don't know what the SDGs are. And when you go to the Hill or you're talking to congressional offices, you're not even supposed to mention the United Nations, you're not supposed to mention multilaterals. It's very off color, and they'll stop listening to you immediately. It's supposed to be about the US as a unilateral actor usually. And even though those conversations are to advocate for legislation that's for foreign development assistance, and the ultimate goal are the SDGs, it ends up not being a part of that particular discussion that you have with people. And that's a struggle because the US is probably the most consistently generous, even though it's, in my opinion, too small the budget for its foreign development assistance, but still the most generous nation in the world, yet we're not talking about the SDGs as a country, and we're not trying to be more forward and open about the leadership. So that's a pain point for me because you can only push it so much. Similar to your point, the individual can only make a dent in it so much unless your fellows in the working groups and whatnot want to join in on that. And then a quick second pain point is a little bit of a hybrid between what John's mentioned about giving people leadership and speaking space, and your bit too about sharing the power. And that's now that I've transitioned from being a youth and now pretending to be a youth and being older, I am realizing that at one point I was really pushing to have access in spaces that I deserve to have as a youth, and now I'm struggling, now that I'm not a youth, to still push for those spaces, even though I'm the one that should be helping make it possible for the youth to be in those spaces. People are still keeping those doors really closed, and like you said, want separate advisory councils and things of that nature, and instead there needs to be a bit better of an aspect to include youth. So for example, now that I work for a faith-based organization, that tends to be a much older generation that's involved in that work, and when you're pushing for certain issues that might be more attractive to youth, they're closed off to that. So that's another pain point for me, is to keep the really important population that has the biggest stake in all of this, the youth, engaged in things, now that I'm on over that hump. So I'll leave it there, we'll talk more.
Thanks. Andrew?
Thanks. Hi everyone, Andrew Fuse. I work with Church World Service in our technical unit covering climate and migration. I use he, him, his pronouns, and very happy to be here with everyone today. I think a couple pain points that I'll mention. One, in working over the last couple years with colleagues in our CWS country offices and regional offices, trying to see how can we bring to life the right to stay for our partner communities, for people in the programs that we're working with, in places that are really feeling the effects of climate change, where we know climate change is one of the factors in people perhaps migrating into vulnerable situations, in some extreme cases what I would characterize as displacement, based on what we've heard from people themselves describing to us. How can we bring to life the right to stay through investments in place adaptation, in disaster risk reduction, while also trying to bring to life the right to move freely? And I think a lot of my colleagues come from a rural development background, a disaster risk reduction background, and are rightly invested in trying to find solutions so people can stay in place and live with dignity where they are. At the same time, I think we've learned over the last couple of years, including through a research project that we did with CWS, that in some cases moving is a coping mechanism. In some cases, moving is becoming one of the few, if not only, choices for people in communities where we're working. In some places, people are unable to move, don't have the resources to get out of harm's way, whether that's something that they would want to consider or not. So thinking through it, even as we're working on projects and putting together indicators, frameworks, how do we set a goal, how do we set an objective that we can measure? Sometimes I'll read the objective of prevent people from moving. So, which I'm understanding where that's coming from in terms of the motivation to provide resources so that people don't have to move against their will or into situations where they're going to face other sorts of threats. But for us to start thinking of it in a way of how do we expand freedoms, and in a way the freedom to stay and the freedom to move are two sides of the same coin. Mobility and immobility are two sides of the same coin. So I haven't come up with anything brilliant on it, nor have I come across others yet who have. So hopefully for our discussion today, we'll get some brilliance through the crowdsourcing of this conversation here to help us move this pain point forward. My other literal pain point is my lower back and so I may at times get up and just sort of drift around the room to stretch my legs and stretch my back. I'm not leaving, I'm just exercising my freedom to move. Thanks everyone.
Great, thanks, this is great. I'm going to ask maybe Kate to give us a deeper dive. Not because yes, of course I'm biased towards church and service, but I had most time to talk with her about what I hope that we can get to. So can you give us one layer deeper in terms of how what type of issues do you face as a formerly youth? In a faith-based organization.
Sure.
Especially maybe around EAD as well and how that goes.
Sure. Yes, we'll definitely talk a little bit about EAD, which is Ecumenical Advocacy Days, which is meant to be a few days where a bunch of faith-based organizations come together in lobbies. We'll talk about that in a second. But the thing that crosses my mind immediately is this piece of legislation I've been working on now for, I don't know, John, like 5 years, the Girls Lead Act. Started working on it with 4 or 5 other organizations and helped write that legislation in my previous role at the Hunger Project. And the whole premise of the Girls Lead Act is to ensure that U.S. foreign development assistance carves out specific initiatives for girls and young women's civic participation and leadership skills development. So essentially, like, think of like the Girl Scouts of America programming would do to make sure that there's better gender equity in communities for people to take up livelihood and leadership skill roles. And it's been bipartisan. We have sponsors both on the Republican side of the House and the Republican side of the Senate. But now we're starting to, and it's considered a very like partner-friendly piece of legislation because it doesn't touch what are still important topics of like sexual reproductive health rights, but it stays just more in the lanes of livelihood, skills development, leadership. So it means for faith-based organizations and for more conservative offices, it's actually a very appealing piece of legislation because it's not controversial, even though those issues are still incredibly important. But we're now starting to get all this really creative pushback from ultra right-wing conservative groups claiming that the use of the word gender in general is threatening, and advocating for democracy literally means that will be a way to advocate for sexual reproductive health rights. So we've had to deal with like groups that have pretty good sway on a number of offices on both the House and Senate side. Want us to change some of the verbiage after we've now been dealing with this piece for like 5 years. So it's just been interesting to be still a part of a small group of young women pulling this together and pushing it into the committees to get it to the floor to vote on it, while people are still saying that the most basic non-controversial issues of just letting people become leaders in their communities and learn how to participate in their civic rights is a problem, and it's just basic sexism, basic ignorance. And I think that's been interesting because, as I mentioned, I came into that piece of legislation as a youth, wrote it from a youth perspective, and now I'm trying to push it with a higher level of experience and years with it. So I think that's been interesting because we all know how important the gender aspect of the SDGs are, and what leadership and bottom-up leadership and community-led aspects of collective work is. So to get the most basic legislation passed for the most generous country in the world is even a problem. So that's been like a particularly annoying experience. John's dealt with that working group before too. So that's like an example of a good deeper dive on gender and the SDGs.
Yeah, let us stay there.
Okay.
Any questions from the panelists for more clarification, communicate on this? No, you guys first.
Oh, I don't know, shoot. I just think this unwillingness, or this, one of my mentors is Frances Moore LePay, and it just was the 50th anniversary of her book, Diet for a Small Planet. And she said, we don't have a food crisis in this world, we have a democracy crisis. That what's missing is people are being systematically denied voice, and it's intentional. And that is a wicked problem. How do you, when someone has the power and is unwilling to share it, in fact, even thinks it would be wrong to share it, what do you do? It's so odd that we're living at this moment when there's this amazing climate crisis, which, that's not new actually. I mean, we knew about climate change 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And at the same time, we were 2 floors up from here, Samantha Powers, head of USAID, was just announcing this enormous commitment to transform USAID to really put power directly in the hands of community organizations, put money directly in the hands of community organizations. So this makes it a very exciting time. But we're working on really important things with a really important opportunity in front of us, and really well-organized opposition.
Yeah.
And I in the last 50 years, I can't remember it really being like that. Where the kind of racism and sexism that drives people away from this field and not wanting to give anybody any say, has become so out in the open. And there's so many people also on our side of the net, and particularly youth, more eager, fired up, ready to go than ever before. So it's a wild ride.
I like how you said organized opposition, because I would definitely agree that that's the case, and it gets to the point where the working group will get together to try to strategize around it. And we're wasting our time trying to battle these people. They're actually just wasting our time.
Yeah.
And they're doing that on purpose. They're doing that to slow our progress towards something. And that's really, really annoying. Coming up with fact sheets just to make sure that certain offices won't keep listening to the organized opposition, won't understand the importance of what we're trying to get done. So yeah, trying to be cautious of what's wasting your time and what's productive too when you're trying to deal with the organized opposition.
Can I share a little story on organized
Yeah, please.
opposition? So I was an activist in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and one of my professors had huge defense contracts. He was designed jet planes and stuff, and was getting all kinds of defense money into the university. And as a result, all of his windows were broken pretty much every night in this beautiful new building. And there's all this chatter in our minds, gosh, are we doing the wrong thing, breaking all his windows? Is that just going to polarize the matter further? Actually, he changed sides. Despite his windows being broken every night, he changed sides and led the charge to get defense contracts off the university campus. So you never know.
Pooja, you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I attended the Transforming Education Summit, just day one, and I felt, and that was just in these last 3 days or so, and I felt that the most important thing I heard said that day, I forgot the title of the person who said it, but he was saying that access to education is still so far behind. Not because we're missing the resources or the knowledge of the how to get there, but because we're talking about people losing their privilege, right? So if you educate the public that does not have access to education, and they are now an educated force, you having that education already are now at the same level, right? So you don't have that privilege anymore that you used to have. You lose that privilege by giving other people the opportunities that you had, and that's why we're struggling to see a lot of changes, not just in education, right? And across the fields.
By the way, there's an old saying in Pakistan that the feudal lord is absolutely committed to better education in his enemy's district.
Sydney, can I ask you to take a deeper dive in what you shared at the beginning?
Sure. I think a lot of the issues that I deal with on a day-to-day basis sound pretty trivial when we're talking about things like youth empowerment and world hunger. But if we are to think about how transportation plays into all of this, I mean, one of the things that I grapple with on a regular basis is now that we've put all of this sort of engineering time and resources into developing a platform that can do urban planning and transportation planning work, what are the implications of that and how can it be used for purposes that don't necessarily align with our mission? And we sell this product into enterprises, so businesses are using it for their employees to commute with. And one thing that we saw happen during the pandemic was sort of almost a resurgence of American car culture. In a lot of the urban areas where large percentages of the population had been commuting on transit or other shared modes, people kind of retreated back into their cars for good reason. I mean, we were all afraid of getting COVID. And so now that employers are bringing their employees back to the office, we're kind of fighting a new battle against the comfort that everyone has found in driving themselves to work every day. And we have so many of our customers are facing, like parking capacity issues that they didn't have before because so many people bought cars and so many more people want to commute in those brand new cars, even if they're driving 20 minutes to the office. And so we've actually had to sort of shift the way that our product team works and focus a lot more kind of engineering firepower behind developing incentives to actually get people out of their cars. And it's really hard to work with an employer to tell them that they should encourage their employees to do something they don't want to do. Because employers are already working really hard to get people to go back into the office, and so they look at our product as sort of a perk to sweeten the deal. But we're saying, the whole point of our platform is to encourage more sustainable commuting behavior. And so those are difficult conversations to have with someone you're essentially trying to sell a product to. And I think that also gets to sort of the problematic nature of the private sector being a partner in the SDGs, and where profit motivations align with activities that can promote progress towards achieving the SDGs, and where they can't, and sort of where we have to sort of draw the line and say not every activity that the private sector does has to be profit motivated, or maybe the private sector is not the most appropriate partner to be sort of a partner for making progress towards the SDGs, and looking at things from a different lens that way. But that's something that we've been working on a lot lately, and sort of developing new tools for how to communicate to people what types of transportation are safe and how there are more sustainable modes than driving that can get people back to work safely.
Any need for additional
Yeah,
questions?
the question.
Yeah.
How does storytelling come into play for your product? So as a startup, right, you have to convince your consumers, potential users, to use your product. And so how do you use storytelling to get them on board?
I mean, like most tech applications, we start with pain points. And commuting is an easy pain point. I mean, we all know how miserable a process commuting is. And so especially when we're talking about employers that are in urban areas, we can look to the leadership in companies, for example, to start advertising that they're taking sustainable modes to work. And seeing leadership within a company, posting a selfie of them taking a scooter for work, for example, as trivial as it sounds, can actually move the needle on getting employees on board and encouraging employee buy-in. And we've tried to develop a lot of tools that are pretty effective at encouraging employees to take a mode they might not otherwise take. And a lot of those are just aligning financial incentives the way that they should be aligned. We will offer a commute subsidy for certain modes and not for other modes, or run a competition, for example. It's just sort of gamify the process. So it's not so much storytelling as it is engaging folks in a process that they can have a little bit of fun with, and it's just a kind of a friendly thing that you can keep track of every day. So a competition of who can take a scooter for the most miles to work in a week, or who can walk to work the most, or who can reduce their commute by the most pounds of carbon emitted in a month, for example.
I see. So you'd say they're more interested in that kind of friendly competition rather than the overall vision of, if you're doing this, you're helping the environment by doing this.
Well, I think that there is an aspect of that too, and I think it's really important. I think that young people particularly care a lot more about the values of the organizations they work for. They're not just going to work to have a job to live off of. We actually sort of care about finding purpose in the work that we do and working for a company that does good in the world. And so when corporations sort of outline their own corporate sustainability goals, I think that employees, that's an important way to engage with employees, the values that they hold themselves that they can sort of share in the workplace, and to see that those things resonate on the individual level with the employees, I think makes work a much more enriching experience.
That is piggybacking your storytelling. Any story that you have for Sydney that comes to mind that is helpful in having another piece of the puzzle.
Wow. In what way though, right? Like open-ended storytelling.
That's hard.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I'm like, which angle to answer this from? Can you come back to me?
Okay. Andrew, you have,
Do you have a story?
a story?
I should have stories. I mean, I find it, I was asked this, I was speaking with college students, a panel that CWS organized last week, and someone asked me how I got into this line of work, which is a good and great, I mean, it's a great question to be asking, especially if you're looking to get into the working world. I try to tell, when I talk about how I got involved in work on migration, I tell it from a personal story. So I've been with my husband now for almost 20 years. When we were first together, there wasn't a way for us as a same-sex couple to have access to, for him to have access to immigration in the U.S. the way that we could have had if we were a non-same-sex couple, and through marriage. That changed for us once the Supreme Court in the U.S. Ruled that we had a right to marriage, and that offered him a path to adjust his legal status. For me, I think when I was first connecting with folks in the immigrant rights movement and the migrant justice movement in the U.S., it was before I was working for CWS, and I just started getting connected because it was affecting my life and my family. And I just would tell people a little bit about how it affected us. I would hear other people's stories, how the immigration policy was affecting them, affecting their families. And I think that's for me where I got a way to learn more broadly about what is immigration policy in the U.S. How are the many ways that it's affecting people and hurting families in many ways. But also for a way for me just to share my story a little bit. And my story is just mine, and it's mine and my partner's, even trying to navigate a little bit what's sort of where is our story, how much of that is his story, how much of that is my story. But I remember over the course of about 7 years, I went from having one experience where I would tell people about us being a same-sex couple and how we couldn't find a way for him just as a status, and they'd nod politely and look at me like I felt like I had 3 heads or something, to being in a community meeting in New Jersey that a friend of mine who's an organizer invited me to. I was sort of stood up to the end and shared this with the audience, and all these people started popping up and saying, yes, we have this as part of our organization's platform, looking at same-sex partners' rights, looking at LGBTQI community more broadly, making sure that LGBTQI plus migrants are part of our movement and part of our organizing. And I reflected that it's probably, among other things, the power of many people sharing their stories over the course of those 7 years. That's where there's some effect and some power to have change, and I have to also look at what changes I'm making in myself within my organization to reflect what I've learned from the stories that people have been sharing with me over this period.
Thanks. Anybody else?
You had a question.
Well, my question was back on the whole girls' lead, like how you factor in like early childhood care and education into getting women to stay in the program, and like that's one thing I find is the biggest contributing factor to getting women in leadership. It's just early childhood care. And, yeah.
No, it's actually a really good question. It's not, that particularly isn't part of the legislation, because this is meant, this piece of legislation is meant to be like an add-on to existing programs. So if there was already an existing program that deals specifically with like early childhood education and childcare and things like that, this would be an add-on to those programs. But to your point though about the education aspect, one of the gaps I had seen in the legislation when I was helping write it was around girls finishing school. And I was like, there's nothing in here about menstrual hygiene management. That's literally the main reason why girls aren't finishing school in most parts of the world.
Period poverty.
Yeah, for sure. So we did make sure there were some elements around education and certain access elements like menstrual hygiene management and hygiene facilities that did get added into it. So that there is some of those cool pieces that, that is super important.
Can I ask you to take a deeper dive?
Into
What
what?
you told us in the beginning. Tell us a little bit more.
Oh, about pain points. Let's see. I actually want to highlight a program run by some audience members here. So Vina and Marie Claire, I volunteer for their org. It's called the Climate Youth. Well, the program is Climate Youth Negotiators Program, and so this is to train young people around the world who want to join their country's delegations as part of the UNFCCC in the negotiations at the UN. And currently, well, until their program, right, there was no training or program open to people from around the world like this. Like specific countries have, programs for any rising youth that they want to onboard, but there was not this overarching program. In fact, like the Instagram handle is just youth negotiators, right? Because I'm not taken yet. So it's been nice to see all the innovation and creative ideas that my peers have been coming up with, testing out, being unafraid of failure, right? Like you have to practice making pitch decks, asking people for financial support, for just verbal support as well, if you're like a country leader, to show that they're really here for us in giving us access to these spaces that they're lucky enough to have access to. And so I'm really interested to see how like the confidence of youth and like the bravery of youth grows as time moves on. And I think in general, bravery, confidence are what is going to be needed from leadership who are not, afraid of outcomes of a potential re-election, right? And will do what they need to do in that 4 years instead of worrying about the 8-year horizon, because we don't have that luxury of time anymore.
Any further questions?
Or for them.
Yeah, really, it sounds very cool. Are you sharing this curriculum yet? Is it?
Yeah, happy to share.
Because one of the things that I think, when I reflect on my childhood, starting from kindergarten, I had all these opportunities for leadership development. Running for class president or Cub Scouts or Girls. So it's and then so many people live in societies that keep youth down even more than this society does, and they don't have those opportunities. And so on the movement calls, we have lots of Zoom calls in the movement for community-led development. I'd love to have you guys share this story of that, because there's young community leaders all over the world who are kind of coming to those calls looking for inspiration, for connection, for opportunities for collective voice and action. During COVID, they got twice as big because outsiders, which would include people from the capital city, outsiders were pulled out of their villages, and the community leaders had to protect their neighbors, and they needed some place to turn to get information, to get voice with their own government. So, stories like that one of youth negotiators, handle not yet taken. That would be, I think, really inspiring to lots of people around the world.
You'd like to react, one of you?
No, share a little bit about, what was the pain point you saw and why you wanted to develop this?
Yeah, maybe because as young people, you mentioned, also you particularly mentioned, right? There are spaces and young people are systemically excluded, and then we're banging our heads, towards the doors and again and again and again. And then at one point, the door opens and then you're so inspiring. Thank you so much for your input. And then the decision making happens and then we're out and no one feels like So I end up being tired, to being always like, oh, this inspiring person. And if the actual decisions are happening, we are not heard. And in 2019, I had an opportunity to actually be a negotiator for the government of Switzerland, the youngest ever negotiator. and kind of do a very direct appointment by the president, which was not done before. This kind of gave me the opportunity to be there, but then instead of just, as you mentioned, just like being happy about the opportunity I have, I created a permanent position for young people in the delegation, but then also further wanted to support more and more young people. Because ultimately, if you have one young person there, you're like kind of a lost chicken in the, there's so many people and you can't really change. But what you need is kind of having a critical mass of young people who are well educated, who actually know and have the leadership skills, as you mentioned, to actually bring about the change in such a very kind of, lockdown space.
Power sharing,
power shifting, where it's very, very hard to bring about the change because there's so much power sitting within a very specific individual. That's what we're doing. We have 60 negotiators from 27 countries, which is already great.
Coming to COP?
Yes.
There will be a talk. I think it would also be pretty historic because not in the history of the UNFCCC conferences have there been these many young people
Really?
negotiating for their countries. So
Because it's like John Kerry is the youngest.
I was wondering if you could share some like reactions of the youth that are participating in the program, or the country delegations that you're working with.
Actually, the most surprising feedback for me was that many heads of delegations, so like the ones who are leading the delegations, but like who actually we never spoke up because we don't even know how to speak up, in the grouping meetings, basically like, the behind the closed door meetings. And like, we actually don't understand how certain things work and how certain bodies interact. It's like, but you're supposed to be the head of the delegation, leading your country's delegation, representing your government. And actually some of them, 50 plus wanted to join the program because they didn't know how to, actually negotiate. I was like, okay, maybe I have to rethink, maybe do like a senior youth negotiator kind of
bring them together.
Wow.
But so we see that many young people kind of see this as a big opportunity to represent also young people, but also see it as a huge burden on them because they have to represent all the young people in many places. We have like a lot of island states kind of seeing how they are already suffering. So it's also kind of brilliant to be able to support them, but also really kind of being this tension of what is actually happening in many places around the world. So there comes a very different energy, I think, into the whole space, because 2030, 2050 are not just empty words, because these are kind of, affecting very much our lifetime, and we're going to be here and around. So
I think maybe if I just have to add to what she said, very specific impressions from young people who we're training also would be that this has really changed how their governments are also approaching it. When the governments had a chance, when they realized that somebody is, like they could outsource the work of on-the-job training or building capacity for the young people, some have been open to it, so they've brought in young people into these delegations, which is fantastic. And a lot of the negotiators we're training are even first-time attendees. They have no clue how it looks like. So they're also super scared, but at the same time they're very excited, and they want to be there, and they want to represent their countries and really be a part of change and decision making. So that's also very interesting to see how somebody who's never been to a COP now is being put in positions of decision making too. So from civil society, you're able to bring them, and it's not just
wonderful.
Anybody else in the audience who would like to react to this?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I came here from a different issue, but I do work. I have a civic youth program. I'm from Colorado Springs. I live here with kids from Ohio. I ended up getting the state. It took 10 years to do voter pre-registration and make it a state law where 16-year-olds can pre-register to vote.
Wow.
But two things that always, number one, especially, when you come from a state that's 90% white, like I'm from in Colorado, and you get to New York, and a big problem is a lot of people see youth empowerment as threats to their jobs in America. That's an electoral process. That's a big problem. That's a big problem why it's harder for us to get a lot of kids to pre-register to vote, because then elected's thinking, well, shit, are they gonna get rid of my ass in like 2 years? Or that's another issue I always say when people talk about, and I always would explain this where I would convince people in my program, there's this misnomer like these youth need to be empowered. Like there's this vacuum, like kids for programs. the Crips, Bloods, Aryan Brothers, they have very, very effective youth leadership programs. And that's what, so people, so,
I guess,
so
can you explain for people who don't know who they are?
they're, you know, street gangs.
Because people
Yeah.
from around the world.
Yeah, local street gangs. They have very effective youth leadership programs. So there's this concept that somehow, and you know how it is when we start youth programs, the big question is, how do you select the students? And usually these, you know, it's always the same ones that rise to the top, but then the other ones that, so, you know, aren't as good academically, they're going to fall, there is a youth leadership program for them. And that's what, you know, and that's what I think we have to convince people. So the problem is, you know, redirecting that power to something else. Because I remember I used to work in Colorado, I used to volunteer with juveniles doing life without parole, you know. And I remember I read about Ishmael Bay, and I ain't gonna lie, you know, growing up where we're from, you know, 5 military installations, the UN already has this bad, you know, we're conditioned UN bad. And I said, wait, let me get this straight. So a 15-year-old in America doesn't kill nobody because of felony murder, they get life without parole. This man outside the country kills 40 people and gets a book in Starbucks. You know, that's we're funding the reason, you know, these UN things are interesting, but now we're sustainable, and now, you know, like, how do we balance the fact of where we're asking people to fund programs outside of the U.S. that aren't funded here? You know, you look at my issue down with water, you look at the problem with water and clean water in America, and they're basically, you know, there's not the funding. Everybody says we can't afford to filter it. So now, how do people here work with organizations who are working internationally who want to take money from here to fund something that's not effective or not, you know, done here as well?
Yeah, well, you got to put, I think you just got to put the lie to the fact that there's no money. There is plenty of money. There is plenty of money for, like, there was a meeting this morning on, will the United States, the richest country in the world, achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? And it's like sliding backwards in this country. And but the one big lie is that one that we can't afford that, which is just such a lie. We can't afford clean water, really? That's just a lie. And you know, I think one of the thing you were mentioning about courage is everyone, young and old, has got to find the courage to speak truth to power, to tell the truth. There is plenty of money. You know, even in some of the poorest countries, if they were fairly allocating their own resources, there's enough. So it's you know, there's a new U.S. government policy with Africa, and for the first time, this new U.S. policy is not treating Africa like a problem that needs help, but really as a partnership, as you know, and that's something I think is really, you know, when you talk about inner development goals, I think that humility to realize, one, you know, this can be done. We can do this. We can do it together, and we can't be forced into, well, don't do this and do that instead. Because there is enough, and what there isn't enough is enough generosity of spirit, love. You know, that's at the heart of what our work is.
Can I ask you to, Puji, you can start maybe, you know, when I asked you guys to look at the inner development goals, and I hope you were able to do that, what are your thoughts there in terms of, wow, this is helpful, or well, I was already doing this is a no-brainer, or what's your reaction?
You know, I think it's super helpful and important to you know, work on yourself so that you can be the best leader, or, you know, figure out your role in society. And leadership looks different for everyone, right? figuring out your role in society or the role that you want to play, and knowing that it's going to change with time. It's not like you have to pick something and just stick with it, commit to it. One program actually that I run, it's on climate and mental health, and it's called Climate Courage. So basically, we bring youth from around the world together to share their stories about the different work that they're undertaking where they live. And they also share like the emotional side of it, right? Like how the impacts of climate change are affecting them emotionally and their communities emotionally as well, right? Like during the pandemic, there was a lot of doom and gloom and sadness in general. And well, it's still ongoing, I guess, you know. But so they had the safe space to talk about their feelings, and that also brought up other issues like some of the like cisgender men. They said, you know, in my cultures and communities, like we're not able to just speak up freely about how we feel. And so having the space for them was really nice, that they got to just like share and talk about their feelings. And some of them didn't really know how to talk about their feelings, right? They were just like awkward pauses or silences, but it all, you know, with time that will get better, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard the word courage a few times during our conversation so far. That's the one that jumped out at me when I looked at the interdevelopment goals.
Yeah.
This morning, just to refresh myself on what they were before we had our conversation today. Because I think even within CWS, there's a lot of things that our organization does and does well. I think there's a lot of pull and push on giving visibility to sort of across the breadth of the work that we do. But there are times when I've been in meetings, especially when I'm working with colleagues or partner organizations on the slower onset of the climate change impacts, and not necessarily the ones that we see maybe most prominently with storms and floods in the news. Not to mention, I think, some of the visibility that gets to the needs of people who are fleeing from wars and persecution. How to be able to speak directly and appropriately, that this needs to be somewhere in our mix of what we're tackling. We need to be thinking about 30 years, 50 years down the line. I like the way you said it. 2030, 2050 these are real points in time that are going to affect people who are alive right now and people who are not yet alive. How do we keep that on our radar screen? And I felt moments where I'll admit feeling scared to speak up, whether it was because I didn't feel like I knew the issue well enough, or whether I felt like I didn't want to contradict other colleagues who I respect, and even if I didn't respect them, I have to work with them regularly. And I think for me, it's a takeaway that one of my reflections that I'll take coming out of this conversation is how can I have what's the right way to be courageous in different spaces? Maybe I need to be courageous in different ways. But I think one of it would be just to not, like the way you said it, John, not to give truth to the lie. Is that the turn of the phrase? If something's incorrect, objectively wrong, just don't let it slide in the conversation.
Because that's what people, I find, so I had the founding boss of the UNGA project was one of those people that always knew the right mantra to say, and one of her mantras was, where there's fear, there can be no love. Mm-hmm. And so one of to me, part of the issue of courage is not just personal courage, but how to evoke, how to mitigate the fear of other people. You know, I mean, if we put 12-year-olds in charge of the country, would it be worse? Yeah, probably not. So how to, you know, it's that fear. And people are stoking that fear, they're exploiting that fear, and Mahatma Gandhi would say, well, first step is just be prepared to die, and then the rest is easy. But it's really true, and we've got to boost each other's courage, because I don't think at least I've never had courage always to tell the truth. And so if we stick with people who are going to keep us up online.
Sydney?
I was really struck by what he was saying, and I was thinking about how we sort of gatekeep participation, especially when it comes to young people, through competition almost.
Yeah.
We make academic achievement a prerequisite to developing any sort of leadership skills or joining any sort of organization. And I think that the Inner Development Goals really try to get at the crux of that, which is broader accessibility in the larger project that is the SDGs, and sort of how everyone has a role to play regardless of their own personal academic achievements or professional achievements or training, and sort of looking within the capacity of each individual for what their own strengths are and how they can be applied in different ways in this broader project, and also looking out for other people in ways that they can participate and sort of reaching out to them where you have access and they don't have access, and whether that's individual activities on an everyday basis or sharing a platform that you have for amplifying the voice of someone who may not have it. It's all sort of part of this broader project.
Can I ask a question to the audience? Yeah. Can someone share maybe like one strength that you have and how you were able to use it to advance whatever issue that you're working on? Anyone?
I'll jump in.
Yeah. Chandel.
I did the whole profile thing, and it's like a love of learning. So even beyond school, once I left school, just kept on learning from life. And right now I'm finding that more of the stuff I learned out, like my career, I guess this one is more the informal education than the formal education. So yeah, love of learning. Just keep it going.
I think I can continue either resilience or tenacity. No matter what comes your way, you continue doing what you have to do because you know you're doing the right thing, and somehow it will not work.
Anyone else?
Sure, yeah. One strength I've always had is collaboration and bringing people together and finding like shared goals, not really centering like any individual or group's success over others. And I think that's been the main way. I feel like this work needs to happen in coalitions and in partnership and with joint power building, and I don't think I would have advanced really anything in this career path without that.
I always feel like a lot of this work is about finding shared values and common ground, right? It's hard for people to disagree that we should all have clean water, right? Or clean air, but then it's like, okay, we have this shared common ground, but now what actions are being taken, right?
Yeah, and that's very important. I'm from Sri Lanka, so one of my strengths is more like helping people to identify their strength and to bring their potential out, regardless of where they come from, what background they are. So, when I was doing one of the grassroots activities in Sri Lanka, I had a sort of a discussion with young people, and there was a young girl. She was a daughter of a postman in that village. So this postman was always listening to the workshop that we have been doing. It's about SDGs, specifically on quality education and all that. After about few weeks, this postman was requesting resources from each and every house he is going to deliver the letters. And he came to my house as well. And he has been asking resources from my parents, and my mother was telling the whole story. So when I spoke to him, he said to me, when you were talking to my daughter, I realized that I have my power to mobilize people within my capacity. Even though I was an advocate, I could not go to each and every house ask for help, right? but postman could do because he's the one who's delivering. So he started a campaign to support about 50 to 60 underprivileged children, mobilizing the village that he's delivering the letters. I mean, so that's kind of a collaboration that we could actually bring into the society. I mean, like you said, we have the knowledge, we have the resources, just that connecting people from different parts of the community and the world, helping them to identify their potential, then it's easy.
Oh, but that's the best story ever.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I can share. One of the things I've been doing. Actually, I'm from Hong Kong, and the thing is, the people in Hong Kong is not concerned about climate change. And when we keep talking about what is climate change is coming, it's the end of the world, and then they think it's none of my business because, you know, the people living in Hong Kong is so, most of them is rich, they can afford a good house. So when typhoon is coming, basically it's not affecting them. And we have no earthquake, we have no war, so it's a peaceful place. But we try to use the skills, I call skills is like we change the wordings. We don't talk about climate change, but we tell them it's something actually affecting your daily life and health. So I think it's kind of, we use some language to make most of the people understand it's actually affecting them. And that's why one of our job in Hong Kong is doing is do some dialogues with different groups of people. Like we did a dialogue with some subdivided flats households. They live in a very small share flats, and then they don't know what's climate change. But when I tell them, actually you are experiencing climate change every year, every summer, because it's 40 degrees and then they have no air conditioning to turn on, and they understand, oh, it's climate change. and then I want to do something. So yeah, it's something I want to share is try to find some way to make the local people understand. Yeah.
Okay, I would like to share my story as well. Okay, so my name is Nihal Mayur. I'm from Mumbai. I live in New York City, and I work for UN Zimbabwe. So that's all the partnership is all about. So I work on SDG 17. That's my core area, partnership building. The challenges with all the civil societies, including us, to get a grant, and everyone wants to work on Goal 17, but strategically it is, when we talk about partnership building, it's always a member state or a UN entities are into partnership building, and we don't have much scope on Goal 17. But where I work and how I get grants for my country, I can share that so that everyone from civil society understand. So we tap on state grant with the US government, and we work on their criterias, what are the requirements they have, and we approach to our embassy and mission that these are the grants for the civil society and they have to endorse us for the grants. So that is how we build a multilateral partnership building, and we get a grants. And I am specialized in disaster risk reduction, so I work in that core area, and I've been working on 17 grants since 2016, and we successfully able to get grants for Southern African region. So if you want to know more about how we can work, so I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to know more about that.
Yeah, talking about superpowers and strength. I would actually come up with two strengths that I think, at least in my life, are pretty important. Number one is never stop learning. I'm working as a professor at a university, and I think if you want to teach young people, you can't stop learning yourself. It doesn't work. So how can I teach young people about SDGs without actually, learning myself? And that's what I've actually been doing all my life. Teach myself and moving on to new goals and trying to reach something new. That's what I've been doing basically the past, I don't know, 35 years. I'm now 57 years old, and I enjoy what I do. I really love what I do, to be honest, and I do that with a great passion. And I think there is a second strength that helps me a lot. That's sharing is caring. I started very early in my career to actually talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing that, and how our company, for example, I started a company 30 years ago, and how we are doing that. And everybody was going like, why would you give away that knowledge? And I would say, well, if I give away that knowledge, there are more people out there that know how to do that. And if there are more people out there knowing how to do that, it's going to help us all at the end of the day. Because if I keep that exclusively for me or my company, we might grow big, but we might not solve problems. So if we want to solve problems, we need to share what we know. Yeah? And that's basically those two strengths combined, I believe, my superpowers.
Just to answer about like the strength. I'm Jitsai from Thailand, Bangkok. I work for a renewable energy company. I think it's a private company, so we do a lot of stakeholders and we do a lot of discussions with the government and policymakers. And I think one of the key issues for at least the energy transition part of it, but I think a really important part of it is not just kind of do like find the easiest route or the lowest hanging fruit, but what is sustainable? Like what is how do we do something that is transformative, is practical, and is something that is feasible. And I think a lot of like coming from a renewable energy background, it's a lot of like, okay, we do solar well, we just keep building more solar. That should be the answer. But there's also stuff about energy efficiency, so it should come involved. So looking at like a bigger picture and then accepting that maybe that's not maybe the most profit-driven thing to do for your company or your organization, or it's the easiest thing to do. But in that bigger picture, it's kind of like, yeah, how do we do that? How do we do something that is actually sustainable? And for all the SDGs, I'm sure have like their own ways of doing it. But yeah, I think that's really important. It's like to look at the big picture versus the lowest hanging fruit for your own organization or company.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would just say, to me, independent and critical thinking, because groupthink will always shut you down. I mean, when I bring kids here from, our program, we bring kids from Ohio, electeds here always be like, why don't you just have them go to Cleveland? Why don't you bring, why you have them come here? And then also, like he said, the sharing. One thing that helped my youth program a lot is I would tell electeds here, I said, you could claim it as your own program, I don't care. So and empower them. I think you have to be in it to actually empower people. Because if you're not empowering the people you're working with, then it's going to be a failure, because there's just a lot of, competition, especially when you come to youth, in other parts of the country. Like people talk about youth programs. When you look outside, you see kids doing sports at 5 years old. Those are youth leadership programs, and so you're having to compete with them. So a lot of kids, it's just hard to get them to relate to something that can be considered far off and doesn't impact them directly. So you just have to kind of come up with different ways to engage youth in something that that they don't see any immediate effects to.
What does your shirt say, by the way?
It says in the U.S. Environmental pollution kills more people than guns. That's another problem with youth. My issues now with Black Lives Matter, they get all crazy about a police shooting. This is actually only maybe 1,300 a year in this country. But then, pollution kills about 500,000 people in the United States every year. But we're all crazy about guns, and we can get everybody, especially in the black community, we can get them organized around guns. But then you can't really get them organized unless you're in Flint around other climate issues.
Anybody else? No. I would like us to continue the conversation, but when I grew up, food and drinks are important. So, we should slowly go there and continue our conversation. But before we do that, I would like to ask our panelists. to share your, maybe a quick takeaway from today. Andrew, can I start with you?
Could try. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have some. This was helpful for me. I think in thinking through for some. What are some of the qualities or strategies? Maybe it's a mix of the two that can help me try to get past some obstacles that I'm facing, not just in work, but in other areas of life. So I think that's for me one of the values of having conversations, and really why crowdsourcing is a great approach to problem solving, because the more ideas that you got out there, the more likely you'll find ones that can work in the situations you're facing now, and ones that you're going to face down the road. So thanks to everyone for speaking up and sharing.
Two things have come to my mind. One is it's really easy to feel like a pebble on the beach when you're up against huge institutions and countries, thinking about shifting power, sharing power, or even shifting money into other pots, because like John said, there is enough of it, and looking at reallocation, and you're asked to challenge like the United States DoD, Department of Defense, and like have them move money. That seems impossible, but I guess trying is better than not trying, because you can still get somewhere. And then the second bit is, we talked a lot about like courage and sharing power and shifting power, and I think one of the big things is trying to convince the people in power to not be afraid to let other people who step into power to fail. Like, I think I got where I got, and I was able to like develop myself as a leader and learn how to empower other people because someone took a chance on me and let me fail in the beginning, right? So I think it's important not just to be someone that is welcome to, sharing your privilege and your power or help convince others to do that, but then to make sure they also know that it's okay if whoever comes into that position fails a little bit. That doesn't mean they are a failure or going to fail the whole time. Because I think we get wrapped up in making sure things are done perfectly, or I can do a better job than this person, or that person in power has been doing it for 20 years, they should just keep doing it. And if we keep trying to act that it's all about the job being done perfectly all the time, then I think you're missing out on other awesome perspectives and then leadership roles that can be taken up by other people. So I'm gathering that not being afraid to let people fail in their new positions of power is just as important as giving them the chance to do it. So,
thank you.
I like this point about like sharing is caring, and like so my grandfather's older brothers, my great uncle, they say here, he was like a freedom fighter in India when the British had taken over and all of that, and I just never really had chances to talk to him and hear how did they successfully build their movement, and how can we learn from their wisdom in our climate movement right now, or our voting rights movement, whatever X movement, right? Like, we need more spaces for sharing this knowledge, for working together across generations, across sectors, across issue areas, and taking that step to stay in touch and really continue the conversations. I know it's hard to find bandwidth at times, but if you don't see like a group coming together, right, being that person to create that group or create that space for people to come together and share and move forward together, I think is important. Like we have the space today, yeah.
Well, there was so many. So Pooja's question prompted all my takeaways. I just have to say that pushing the event into all of us collectively, we would have otherwise never heard the Bloods and Crips as a leadership development program, or the postman, or it's just particularly in a place like this, everybody here is somewhere being a catalyst in this quest for human dignity, and it's so precious, and so just it's such a precious opportunity to be with people who kind of are in touch with that magic possibility in our lives.
Isn't it also nice to just hear like what has inspired or stood out to the people who are here? Like what stories they remember and want to share that were like, oh, that affected me.
I think for me, I'm hearing over and over again and through different lenses sort of the importance of getting to the center of those shared values or common ground, and how, you know, this broader project of the SDGs may seem to be, you know, only apply to certain people at certain times, and how, you know, certain people may feel like they're kind of immune to the effects of climate change, but having the skills and almost the empathy to be able to understand how it affects everyone in one way or another is such an important skill to any of the work involved in the SDGs. And I personally was a bit hesitant to talk on a panel about this because I come from the world of tech, and you know, I'm talking about things that have more to do with organizations like the UN and public policy and NGOs, and this conversation has really sort of highlighted to me that it is a joint project and that partnerships are so incredibly important in sort of understanding how, you know, generally I think that people who can't see issues through the eyes of other people lack empathy, but fortunately the SDGs and climate change in particular is something that affects everyone. So you don't need to prove to someone that it's affecting them personally for them to care about it, or at least it's not that difficult. Sorry?
I said I feel like you still have to prove it to them.
In some cases, yes. Sadly.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for listening. I don't know if it normally is you know, that kind of a moderator is kind of wrap up and, you know, say the magic words, and this is what we have learned together. But I think if we really listened carefully, and you know, to be honest, I'm not a really good listener. And you know, my colleagues know that around 1.5 years ago or something, I started a podcast, which is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I could not walk with other people during that week that I'm walking at 100 mile. So I thought, okay, I'm going to walk virtually. So I start this podcast where I talk with people about, you know, SDGs, about, you know, religion, spirituality, why are we here, etc., etc. And the first couple of podcasts that I recorded, you know, I had to edit, and then I was listening to it, and I said, that's interesting, you know. So because I think many of us, or let me speak only for myself, you're so busy with trying to convey what you know and what you learned, is that you really don't listen to the others. And I think that's really, if we would all start doing a better job there, then we would make enormous strides forward. The other thing that I heard, I was not expecting that. The other thing that I heard is zijn er mensen hier die Nederlands praten? Kunnen spreken? Niemand spreekt Nederlands. So my point is, language is also important, right? So, you know, the context where you are, or even if you all speak English, you know, you speak differently, you use different concepts as well, and you need to understand. If you listen well, you know how you can come up with language that, you know, the people you talk with understand, and then together you can move forward. I think that's also important. Yeah, you know, coming back to what you mentioned, that, you know, I would like to see that, is it possible to, you know, those youth that are courageous and are doing all these things, you know, that they move forward. Will there continue to be a space for that? That's what I heard you say. I was thinking about, you know, I asked a question about on my podcast, what are your worries? And then, you know, many of my guests are always saying, you know, I'm afraid because of climate change or polarization and this and that. And then there's another question, where do you still see hope? And 95% of the people are saying in the younger generation. So yes, then you need to ensure that you create, you know, the spaces that we can start to co-create and talk together. but there is where I also see hope. I do have to say though, in the podcast, I'm trying to my best to reach out to a younger generation, to have them on my podcast. It's extremely difficult to get those. I get always the old folks like I am, which is also interesting. They have some interesting stories as well. So I think you need both. So thanks a lot. I will continue to be here, not until all the bottles are done, but until. so I hope that I really invite you to stay and to have conversations with each other. I think we, as the CWS, we kind of committed to continue to try to create these type of sessions that are maybe a little bit different, because I do think that the Inner Development Goals are crucial when we are talking about the SDGs. They need to go hand in hand. And maybe the last question that I would like to tell you, because this is a friend of mine who's working also with me about thinking how can you introduce the Inner Development Goals where we work, and she said to me, the big idea is, what if our true work, so the work that we really need to do, is to reinvent work for ourselves and future generations. Let us think about that. So thanks a lot, and yeah, please go ahead and.
A question for the crowd: where are the bathrooms?
The elevators.
Yeah, near the elevators.
Good.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I just want to add one more point because I'm late. But I'm really inspired and impressed by what you all said about it. And I always believe that to promote and then implementing the SDG, it's not just letting more people hear our voice and raising up the awareness. On the other side, we also need to cooperate with local government, like from grassroots, to really implement it. And it's just very lucky and happen to be that our organization focusing, one of the SDG we're focusing on is the climate change. And we already working with multiple countries' government to building like wind power plant, solar power plant, and recently also the pea hydrogen fuel. The hydrogen fuel is our technology not only just turns the energy from water, hydrogen into water, but also can observe the existing like CO2 to making the environment better. So I'm just thinking that if any of your people here, you're representing your public sector or private sector, your country, government or company, organization, if anyone interested, we can definitely have a conversation and looking for more cooperation to make the world better and leave more positive legacies for people here. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, guys.